Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Porcupine Perspective Podcast. Evelyn, welcome back to Wichita. I know you had a long weekend out of town. How did everything go up there?
Not bad. I actually went out of town with my little sister, Sophia. You guys remember her. She's turning 30 this year, and just thought we'd kind of get out of town and kind of have a girls' weekend, which basically comprised a half-day trip getting there, the one day there, and the half-day back, because we have kids. So, exciting stuff. But it's good to be back. It was a good weekend, though.
It's good to have you back, and we apologize for releasing this one a little bit later. I wanted to make sure that Evelyn was well rested for the topic matter that we have involved, and to be honest, you didn't miss anything while you were gone. I don't know.
Well, no, you guys had a rip-roaring storm come through, though. Our phones are still connected to our local weather, and they were just like bing, ba-bing, 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 with all these, like, there was tornado warnings and flash flood alerts and dangerous thunderstorm alerts. I mean, it's been a fun year.
You're kind of painting a scary picture of the Midwest, and, you know, we need more people living here, and
well, you know,
I don't think
it's
you're
really
a good
only in the
advertisement.
spring, early summer, to be fair.
And don't forget the winters and the blizzards and the ice storm. Oh, no, I'm doing it. Never mind.
We haven't had blizzards in years. I mean, every, 4 or 5 years there's an ice storm, and then it goes away. So, I mean...
That's enough. That's enough. But anyway, what I was going to say is you really didn't miss all that much on the news, and hopefully you stayed away from it. But you can tell that we are getting closer and closer to the beginnings of the political process that we call democracy here in the United States. The other word for it is mudslinging. You've got people coming out of the woodwork to say this person did this or this person didn't do this, and then the talking heads spend hours every night trying to dissect why they're saying this, why they're not saying this, and
you know,
how it would be
this whole
different.
season is, to be honest with you, the reason primarily that I'm so relieved that I don't have cable anymore. I don't have to fuck with any of this. I don't have to listen to it. I don't have to go through the 6-minute long commercials of this candidate versus the next candidate that comes on and disparages the previous one. It's ridiculous and exhausting.
It's a shit show.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, let's call it for what it is. And although there are a lot of people that wonder how, you know, they'll tell me, how can you walk through in your day-to-day life and still remain sane, seeing the things that you see them as? Because you can't unsee them. We've talked about that before. But honestly, especially in a time during a heavy political system, it almost seems to be a welcome vacation from it, because I'm not getting torqued off because the Democrat said something about the guy I like, or vice versa. It's actually kind of a relief. I never thought I would say that politics is a relief. I may have to go check my temperature, but the reality is I think it's going to be a little bit easier this season. So
there's a possibility, but I mean, the other thing that comes with it is the onslaught of new promises of all the new laws that they're going to bring into effect and all the new regulations they're going to put into effect. In addition, of course, you have the tax. And I think the new hot button topic lately is, what is that? The student loan debt. I see a lot of that going
forgiveness.
On, right. But it's all going down to, well, I'm going to introduce this law and I'm going to introduce this regulation. Like that ever makes anything better. I guess that's where, yeah.
No, and like a lot of people have already said, not to go too deep into what the pundits and the potential candidates are saying, but like the student loan forgiveness, that's a great example. Sure, you're going to take these people off the hook, but who are you placing on the hook? Someone's going to have to pay the teacher. Someone's going to have to pay the college. Someone's going to have to pay the books.
Well, it's not fixing the fundamental problem.
No, it's not.
I see a lot of, there were memes going around that my sister was showing me because she's kind of perked up on that. Obviously, we both have a lot of student loan debt, but we're managing it and keeping it in check. But there's some people who are making comments about how there were those who had student debts a long time ago and paid them off and are pissed off now. But one of the arguments that those that currently have them are making is the exponential difference between the cost that the exact same degrees were, essentially, not just from now, but even 20 years ago. I mean, it's insane, the exponential increase that tuition costs. It's crazy. I think that's where the problem is. Why is it $20,000 a year for, 20 credit hours a semester? It's insane.
Yeah, and it's definitely out of control. I will agree with you. Student loan debt is kind of one of those touchy subjects. On the one hand, I want to sit here and don't take this the wrong way and say, well, you got into a career that required a degree that doesn't really matter.
Absolutely. Now
But
let me cut in on that really quick, and I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Going in with your eyes open, absolutely. Did I know going in, I'm going to need to accept this level of debt in order to complete the degree that I want to go into the field that I feel is the right match for me? Yes. But having a level of understanding that at 35 versus 18 years old and not being able to really not just understand, but really conceptualize the commitment you're making for the next 10 to 20 years financially, at least.
yeah, and just for clarification, it did not take her 17 years to complete college because
Thank you for No, it did not. I started school. My family is kind of during that housing crisis, unfortunately lost their home. So I stepped away from school to work and kind of get everybody, all of us back up on our feet. And during that time, met my husband and moved, and life happened, and I was a stay-at-home mom and did not complete my degree until my youngest was essentially starting kindergarten, and then I went back and finished it up. So it was more important for me to economize, and to my husband as well, and make sure that we were present there at home as much as possible. But thank you for the shout out. I appreciate that.
not a problem.
That would.
Yeah, 17 years, we do the math. Okay, you are not very smart.
That's like that Tommy boy thing, like, shouldn't I have my doctorate by now kind of a thing.
But the thing I was going to say is, on the one hand, yes, these students are choosing to go into degree fields that require something that should not cost that much. But at the same time, I don't think that we should have a system that says, well, if you want to do this and this is your passion and this is what you're good at, then we're going to put this massive barrier in front of you. I mean, how much better service would you get? And when I say service, I mean, whether it be a doctor, whether it be a mechanic, whether it be, you name it, IT, would we get if the people going into the fields were doing what they actually loved?
That's the thing. Not just that, but I think there was such a huge push for so long to make sure you had that bachelor degree, And then you have the flooding of the bachelor degrees everywhere where, I mean, that is essentially now, if you're going into the workforce, like, oh, it's great. It's kind of like having your diploma. If you really want to make an impact, you should really have your master's. So it keeps just like bumping it and bumping it. You're raising the ante every single time. And in the interim, you have all of these technical professions that have kind of started falling by the wayside. So, I mean, our family are huge proponents of tech schools. And for those of you who are not familiar, it's where you're actually learning a craft. You're going in, it's typically 2 years or less. You go into an apprenticeship and you have a career ahead of you. You've already made your connections and you're good to go. It's, yeah, I think, anyway, I kind of squirreled there.
It makes more sense. Yeah. No, you didn't squirrel. It's not a bad subject, and I don't want anyone listening to think we're going to go too deep in it, but I actually, and I hadn't even planned on discussing this, but I learned of a new way of educating yourself. They're called MOOCs, MOOCs. And yeah, you can go ahead and laugh.
No, it's an interesting nickname. I just picture like somebody like crouching in a bush with like self-done camo. Watch out, guys, I'm a mook. Anyway, go ahead, sorry.
I figured it was going to be a Jungle Book reference to Mowgli or something like that. But
Mowgli, oh man. Okay, go ahead. I'm not even going to acknowledge that you just said that. Go ahead, talk about your mook.
Do I need to put on camo for you to make this work?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Anyway, if you guys have not had an opportunity and you're interested in education to take a look at this, just do a search. Like for me, I'm using an app called Coursera, and it's basically a massive online learning classroom, and you can take college classes for free. Now, you don't get any accreditation for it, but let's say you wanted the accreditation. I think Coursera is like $49 a month, something along those lines, and it's self-paced. You can run through it and get as many certifications as you want. Or you can just go through, like I am right now, and audit these courses. I'm studying a little bit about HTML. I've done some website design the hard way, both our website and a friend of mine that I'm helping. And I decided that, this is actually kind of fun. I'm enjoying this when I'm not crying and ripping my eyeballs out because I can't figure out why this stupid widget won't do what I'm telling it to. But the long story short is, any of you that are listening right now and think, hey, there's a skill that I wish I knew, but I don't necessarily need the accreditation for it. This is a great option. I mean, MIT's offering courses on it, University of London. The course I'm taking is from University of Michigan. These aren't little no-name colleges, and you are getting roughly the same instruction as you would sitting in a college classroom, only you're doing it at your own pace on your own computer. You're sitting through the lectures, and again, if you want the accreditation, you can get it. And no, I'm not an affiliate of them. I don't make any money if you go to Coursera. It's honestly just something that I thought was really cool. And your conversation about the student loan debt.
I just to throw my own 2 cents here on this, if you don't mind. I've just started glancing over it. It's hard finding free time much anymore to really kind of pursue these things, but I'm a big proponent for continuing to learn through your entire life. And so having the chance to really kind of pursue and learn about things through these courses and through experts within the field in some areas is really kind of a cool advantage. So speaking of learning and reading, though, I understand you finally, for the third or fourth attempt, have finally started getting into Atlas Shrugged?
I've actually crossed the threshold, at least what I'm considering the threshold. I started the book. That didn't work. I didn't get very far in it, and I was like, okay, I'll do it on Audible while I'm at work. I have the time to listen to stuff like that while I'm doing my day-to-day. Started it and didn't get very deep into it. And then again, for a third attempt, I tried it. Did not happen. So yes, now I'm on the fourth attempt. I've finally crossed that threshold. Now, well,
the whole reason you started reading this was based off of a lot of recommendations from people kind of within, I don't want to say the
freedom movement.
The freedom movement or the Libertarian Party, but it came highly recommended. And I remember hearing you talk about it. I was like, how's that going? You're like, oh God, it's just as boring. But wasn't it, I think it's written in like 1957.
1957. Ayn Rand wrote the book. This was her magnum opus. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes. There you go.
I'm just making sure, because you never know.
I'll correct you. Don't worry. I'll shout you out.
I know you will. But a lot of it, and if you read the first sections, any of you guys that have read it, you're like, God, I'm so sick of hearing about railroads. I don't care about the flipping railroads anymore.
So it's a slow starter.
It's almost a no starter, in my opinion. But I am very, very, very glad that I stuck it out this time. And there is a point in the book, and I'm not going to offer any spoilers, so don't worry if you haven't read it. You're not going to learn anything necessarily from what I'm about to say. I almost said this podcast, and that would have sounded terrible, and you're not going to learn anything from this podcast. And we probably have the listeners that are going, no, I haven't anyway. So
purely entertainment value, folks. There you go.
Purely to hear you screw up the English language. That's all. But anyway, finally crossed the threshold, and the book is at the point that I can't put the damn thing down. I'm listening to it every day. On Audible, it's broken apart in sections, and I want to say this thing is close to 60 hours of audio. Now, this book is considered one of, God, I hate to even use this word, but the closest example I have is a holy book to the freedom movement. Whether you look at Road to Serfdom, you look at
1984.
Law. And 1984's, yeah, but it's not considered part of the pantheon. Rothbard, Friedman, the books that, as you are getting your feet wet in the freedom movement, that you need to read so that you can understand. And this is, of course, a fictional book that deals with what happens when the movers and the doers stop doing both. When they finally have had enough and basically their minds go on strike and the world cannot take advantage of what they do, whether it be a service, a product, you name it. And the thing that I felt really stuck out, especially for the podcast episode that we wanted to do here, was a interaction between one of the main protagonists of the story and a government agent that was sent there to negotiate with the protagonist, or at least put pressure on him. And the government agent said something that really stuck out. Like, it's very easy for the government to deal with criminals. And I'm paraphrasing here. Because with criminals, you already know they don't have any scruples, they don't have any morals, and it's very easy to get them to do things that are immoral and unscrupulous. But the reason we have so many laws is not necessarily for the criminals, it's for those that are the most virtuous. If you make it such that it's impossible for the virtuous to not break a law, then you make them criminals. And once you make a virtuous person a criminal, they will do anything in their power to make sure no one else thinks that they're a criminal because they're virtuous. So it's very easy to get leverage on them. Now, the side effect of this, of course, is that with a common man, someone like me, someone like you, that really doesn't benefit the government other than it's another way to get money, to get part of our income to help feed their operation. But you take some of these larger corporations, whether it be Amazon, Apple, to name a few, and I'm not saying this is what has happened, but companies that necessarily would not do the government's bidding, once you can take the CEO or some of the people that are in power and turn them into criminals, it's a lot easier for the government to have underhanded dealings with them.
Okay. But don't you think that does apply to the common man as well? Because through these sets of laws, then you then control not just a narrative, but you control their decision-making process on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, absolutely. But I don't think that the federal government is making a law with me in mind, for instance. Now, does it affect our day-to-day lives, like whether or not we go 41 miles an hour versus 40, wear a seatbelt, get our vehicles inspected if you're in one of those states? Yes, it absolutely does. But the real power comes from influencing these large companies, whether in this book they were the industrialists. In our day and age, I would argue it would be more like the Apples, the Amazons, the Walmarts, the places where we purchase goods. And if you think about it, two things that come off the top of my head that we are known for is consumerism and oil and tech. So that's kind of replaced the old factories as they were before.
Right. No, I could see that. It was interesting as we were talking about this. So you're going into, like when we were kind of shooting the breeze on what we were going to go into, you started going into a lot of laws that have been kind of systematically put in place increasingly through our history. And I remember you started off with the Civil Rights Act, and we were right away like, well, or I shouldn't say we, I was like, well, I think that one was necessary. And you kind of bristled out at that one really quick, like, what? Necessary? It's another law. And I think we ended up kind of coming to an agreement on that one for the fact that I think it mattered because it undid legislation that had been built over time that was incredibly unjust and, in my feelings, just disgusting to do to other people. So, but again, I think it more tied into it was a law that undid others. But I mean, you can take it from there. But
no, you're absolutely correct, and I'm glad you put that caveat in it because I can imagine a listener going, "Oh, they don't like the Civil Rights Act." Boop. Pause.
No, it was nothing about that. It was more you bristled out the fact that I was like, "Well, that was a necessary law," and then you went. I mean, I saw it in your face. You like you were going to throw something at me.
I will agree in that it was necessary to undo the damage that previous laws had done, that it was closer to the recognition that we're looking for, which is all humans are equal. Thomas Sowell famously has said that he is absolutely for equality. His problem is when you say gender equality, ethnic equality, women's equality, like that would be a double. You're repeating yourself, or what you think equality means is not what equality does mean. Because if we're equal, it doesn't matter what gender you are. It doesn't matter what sex you are. It doesn't matter what your sexual preference, your color, or anything else. We're just equal. But if you have to put would that be an adjective into the equality, then you are focused more on the rights for a particular group being more equal. It's kind of like Orwell's Animal Farm. Some are more equal than others.
Right.
Which is typical of the government, but...
That is true. But as again, and sorry, I'm going to steer us back over a little bit. I didn't mean to kind of throw you off on the curve there, but going through that, we were kind of looking at the progression of federal laws that kind of came into place, and so many of them really just kind of seem to be altruistically in appearance trying to prevent certain things from happening that are actually limiting a lot of, I don't know if you want to call them civil liberties or things like that, but you have like the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act.
Oh, are you talking about like hate crime legislation?
More into like they have like the church arson.
That's part of hate crime,
right? Going into those, and then it evolved more into the area with Obama when he signed the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Hate Crimes Prevention Act. So I mean, it just keeps ballooning out further and further to, like you're saying, like more narrowly define. Well, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, as opposed to do no harm. Period.
In my opinion, it's worse than the narrowing effect that you're talking about. It started with the Civil Rights Movement, and part of the Civil Rights Act made it a federal crime, basically to commit a crime based solely upon a person's color, identity, whatever that they were identifying as. Basically saying, well, you murdered this person, that's bad. But because you murdered them because of the color of their skin, that's badder. So we're going to put you in jail for longer. And then it kept escalating with the Arson Act that you were talking about. It was billed as we're trying to prevent people from attacking freedom of religion, for instance. But how do you define religion?
That's what I'm saying. It's coming in from these altruistic places, though, that on the surface seem very well intended, where we are trying to squash this mentality of hate and racism. So by making this penalty when it is geared towards racism even worse, we are then in turn going to deter people. Like I said, I mean, does that make sense? Or am I not explaining this right?
No, you are explaining it correct.
Arson's bad enough, but man, when you attack a church, that's horrible. So we're going to try to deter anybody from doing that by making this a federal offense if you do it for this reason, or to this place, or to this person. And
with mandatory minimum sentencing. And this, all three of the acts that you mentioned all have some aspect where they're saying, well, you would get 20 years, you're getting 30 years. You were going to get 25, you're now getting 40 years. But what it boils down to, in essence, and yes, on the surface, does it appear to be altruistic, and it appears to be attacking hate in our country.
Right. I mean, I can see where the thought process would take you that way. If we make the punishment worse, if we do these things and have these things in place where if you do this, that it will in turn squash the motivations and the thinking behind it. And as we all know, it's not, unfortunately, not how it works. You can't force it out. Clearly, it's still present today. And it feels a little bit silly making this disclaimer, but let me be very clear that, and I'm going to speak for you on this, Sean and I both find any of these acts completely deplorable. Anything, I would say, motivated by racism or hate in any way, I think is disgusting. But simply legislating it isn't going to eliminate what's there. And one of the things I think we're both a proponent of is the fact that if you leave it in the open, I mean, all it does is force people to not be open about it. And so they're all there, and it's just spreading like a fungus underneath the tile that you don't really see, as opposed to being in the open and somewhat, I would think, eradicating itself. But I could be wrong.
No, I don't think you're wrong. I think the issue here is, am I a racist? No. Am I a sexist? No. I can go down the whole list. I'm not it.
Right. That's the screwed up thing about things, especially I think today, because the minute you say something maybe against the legislation that's in place to protect this, then that's what you are. And that's not at all what's being said.
No, it's not. And with your example, you're absolutely right. You are not going to legislate isms out of existence. It's impossible. It's like bombing Afghanistan and hurting civilians and expecting them to love the United States. It's not going to happen. All you're doing is reinforcing their belief. The only thing that changes a human mind is being confronted with evidence, if they're of an open mind, that is contrary to their belief. And you are not going to do this. It's like this sore that you're constantly rubbing. We need to deal with it in the field of debate. Look at the view on homosexuality, for instance. It wasn't because it was legislated into modern mind for being okay. It's that people had an opportunity to interact with these people and realize that a lot of the stereotypes are just completely flippant inaccurate, as most stereotypes are. I mean, some people may argue that there's something to stereotypes. I'm not going to, because I don't like group membership. But the thing that bothers me with this is that a judge or a jury is going to sit there and decide whether or not you had these thoughts in your mind. And if you have these thoughts in your mind, suddenly this murder is much worse. To me, murder is bad. It doesn't get... No, I'm not going to do it. I almost said badder. I did anyway, just to piss you off.
I ignored the first one. I'm not going to anymore. I reserve the right to throw shit at you if you keep doing that.
That's fine. I understood.
Sean was laughing. I when we were getting ready to talk about this stuff, I came over with this shirt the other day, and my daughter's really got a thing for unicorns, and it has a little unicorn on it, and it's kind of prancing around with its nose up in the air, and it says, "I'm silently correcting your grammar." And he started laughing. He's like, "Yeah, that's you. I'm one of those." So I'm the grammar police or whatever. We'll figure it out.
It's okay to say it. It's all right. I'm not going to thought crime you here, but that's what it comes down to, and that's what this reminds me of. George Orwell's 1984, where you can be convicted of having a thought in your head. Now, I've got to ask this question. How do you know what I'm thinking? I mean, there's certain times, like imagine if I'm watching a Trump rally, you know what's probably going through my head. You can guess, but you don't know.
That's where it's coming down through that body language, where it's just like that hard eye roll.
Exactly. But how can someone that doesn't even witness the event have any idea what's going on in your head? I don't think that people should be punished for the ideas that they have in their head. I want to know what the ideas are. I want to engage them in public debate as much as possible, give them the evidence, and let them decide. And if they don't, that's on them, as long as that doesn't turn into harm. But a murder is a murder. It doesn't matter, in my opinion, it does not matter what the intent is. Now, the only deviation I'm going to put here, guys, and I don't even think we call the two crimes completely different. If, let's say, negligent homicide, for instance, is different from murder, even the terminology is different. It is much worse to have the intent to do harm than to accidentally do harm, because those with intent are more likely to perform the act again, which I get. But does this mean you have more intent because you did it and we think it was racially motivated? No. You should serve the same amount of time as anyone that had intent to do harm on another human being, person, or property.
So would you say then that you believe that instances of unorthodox or maybe controversial thinking, as opposed to being considered a criminal offense by having everything out in the open, would hopefully eventually lead to just being so socially unacceptable that the entire motivation for thinking that way is essentially eradicated?
Well, even then, we see it now, for instance. What happens if you post something online that people don't agree with? They lambast you, they try to get you shut down, but that doesn't change the thought. That doesn't take the thought out.
A lot of times it reinforces it.
It almost always reinforces it. You may get a mea culpa from the individual that's involved, but at their core, do you really believe that they've changed to believe? No. Now, I'm not saying we have to interact with these people. I'm not saying that by any stretch of the imagination. If the local baker was a white nationalist and I found out about it, I'm not going to go and give them money. But I'm also not going to go and march in front of their bakery and say, whatever. I can't even think of some slogan right off the top of my head, but let them be, as long as they are not causing harm. Now, there's some people that say that having these thoughts is harmful. I don't see it as actual harm. To me, as long as the thoughts remain as thoughts, it remains a victimless crime.
I could see that. But that actually is a nice little segue into where we were going to go for this second half here. But first, if you would, please take a short break and listen to a word from our sponsor.
I want to take a quick moment to talk about the app that makes this podcast possible, Anchor.fm. Anchor gives you everything you need in one place to create, record, and edit your podcast so it sounds great. Best part, it's absolutely free. They will help you distribute your podcast as well. so you can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and many, many more. Anchor also makes it very easy to monetize your podcast by hooking you up with sponsors right off the bat so you can begin to make money with no minimum listenership. And all you need to do is go to anchor.fm or download the Anchor app, and you too can get started today. All right, guys, welcome back to part 2. Now, if I remember correctly, we left off with victimless crimes, and we talked a little bit about George Orwell in 1984, which another hot subject today. But the main focus we wanted to get into is, what is a victimless crime? What defines it? And what are these crimes doing to society? So go ahead with the definition.
All right, so a victimless crime is a legal offense to which all parties consent and no party is injured. So that's going to include things like traffic tickets, speeding tickets, running red lights, which, yes, obviously poses a danger, seatbelt laws, but it also goes into areas with drugs, prostitution, I guess black market goods, things like selling raw milk or things that are not FDA approved.
I got you. Yeah, and there's some funny ones in there when you talk about the speeding tickets, for instance, and I've said it probably 2 or 3 times already. I'm going to say it every chance I get. You get speeding tickets from cops on frickin' motorcycles.
But if you're riding a motorcycle, you don't get a seatbelt ticket.
Exactly. It doesn't make much sense. And I know it's for our safety. Then let me choose safety. Just like if I want to ride a motorcycle with no helmet, allow me to choose it. If you can't make a compelling argument for my own personal safety, something is wrong. Right. With how you're making the argument, in my opinion, because most of us have a pretty high survival instinct. It's kind of coded in us. Now, some of us don't do such a good job, and Darwin comes and knocks at the door every now and then, but usually starts with, hey, just hold my beer for a second.
Hold my beer.
We hear that quite a bit here in the Midwest. But one of the funny things, and this is one I talked to an individual at work about, we were talking about prostitution. And he's like, oh my God, that's terrible. These women are selling their bodies and are doing this. And I get it. And especially when it comes to like children, those that cannot give consent. But, the first thing, and George Carlin, of course, said this, it's completely free to give it away, but it's completely illegal to sell it, or as he put it so eloquently, fucking is legal. Selling is legal. Selling fucking is illegal.
George Carlin.
But the thing that really got my coworker was like, so what about porn? Because I know he watched it. He watches it. And
you tried to make it past tense for him there for a minute. Like, and you still just going to, now it's current. He watches it.
and there's nothing wrong with it.
No,
I'm not going down that road. And I was like, okay, do you? Yeah. Okay. What's the difference? He says, well, yeah, that is porn. It's obviously different. It's like, okay, you have a male and a female that are both consenting to have sex for a movie, and they're filming it for your enjoyment.
And hey, sometimes they even throw in 2 consenting girls or 2 consenting guys, or pick your pleasure. I mean, it's all there, but it's all, like as you said, consenting.
Yeah, and everyone's consenting at that point, but you watch it, you have no problem with it, and you've got no issue with porn. That is prostitution. It is filmed prostitution. Well, no, they're still completely different. It's like, yeah, in that the state will issue a license. They're required to have a license to film a movie about prostitution because that's what they're engaged in. Well, it's still different. So with some people, you're never going to make that headway, but it's
funny.
I mean,
even when you go into the moral and the health argument on any of that, when it comes to prostitution, well, it's dangerous and there's a spread of STDs. You start looking at things like the Bunny Ranch in Nevada, where it's been made legal. The girls are screened. They're protected. They earn their living and choose the clientele that they want to deal with, or host, however you want to entertain, however you want to phrase it.
That's a good one.
But every party involved is safer, healthier, because this has been made legal.
Yeah, and especially the female in this case, as opposed to having to serve underneath a pimp. And if the pimp does anything negative to her, beats her, harms her in any way, she can't go to the cops. What's she going to say? My pimp beat me? Okay, you're going to jail and he's going to jail. So it's very easy for them on the black market side or the illegal side of this to actually suffer worse consequences.
Right.
For this particular thing.
I mean, let's be honest. At the end of the day, this really comes down to just being a moral argument.
Yes, I do not, and this is something funny that a friend of mine at work said. I've got a couple friends at work, so you'll hear me mention them.
Oh, you have friends. I'm so excited.
Well, they tell me I'm their friends, but...
Ooh. So you don't get picked last for dodgeball?
I do.
Oh.
Anyway, we were talking about this very concept because we deal with, on another podcast, more the religious side, but it kind of is making its way or has made its way into law as well, in that I do not consent for you to give your consent. And that's what a lot of these vice type laws are. I do not consent for you to have the ability to consent to have consensual sex for money, or to have drugs, or to do whatever else. And, you know, like they say, we brought up drugs here. The most dangerous thing about marijuana is what?
Oh, getting caught with it.
That's it. Getting caught with it.
Right. But I mean, marijuana isn't the only illegal drug, obviously. I mean, you have some scientifically proven to do horrible things to your body, to your brain. And along those lines, I can see where that knee-jerk reaction was, to try to put something preventative in place when people have seen the damage it's done to those they care about.
But it goes back to prostitution, just like the argument we made with prostitution. You look at Portugal, for instance, or some of the other countries that have legalized it, and not only decriminalized, but legalized. There's an important distinction there. They have lower instances of overdose deaths and even usage than we do here in the United States, and they can get whatever the hell they want. There's something to be said about prohibition. The human mind, the human spirit, if you want to call it spirit, whatever.
Whatever you're told not to do, you're going to do what you can to do it.
Exactly. We don't grow up. We really don't. And making it illegal makes it fun. It makes it exciting. It makes you want to do it.
Yeah.
They don't want me to do this. That must be a reason why. And we inherently know that it's because it's fun, because it can do some stuff for us that, you know, in the cases like magic mushrooms, which are becoming legalized. I think we have 2 to 3 cities now that have either decriminalized or legalized. As of today, I think Oakland was the 3rd one. These have been shown to help treat PTSD. We've seen some of the derivatives of marijuana help with seizures. And I'm not saying it's a cure-all. I'm not saying that it's a substitute for anything else. Please, again, we're not doctors, lawyers, or any of the above. But it's interesting that there would be any barrier put in front of you. When you can go get a 6-pack of beer, you can go get a bottle of vodka, Everclear, whatever else, and there's obviously a large amount of chaos that's created by alcohol. And I drink myself. I'm not saying we need to not legalize it, or we need to make it illegal, but think of all the people that get into fights, get hurt, spousal abuse, drunk driving, all this stuff that happens because of alcohol. And it's perfectly legal, but you can't smoke a joint. Tell me that makes sense.
Well, I mean, it makes you dangerous to a bag of Funyuns, but I mean...
Or Cheetos.
Well, it depends on your personal preference.
No, it depends on what you have in the cupboard. Let's be real.
Well, yeah. I mean, as long as there's something you can crunch, you're good. But no, I mean, I think once we started really kind of doing some of the research on what has happened with more, and I say recent, but I mean, I'm really talking probably about the last 30, 40 years of the legislation that's gone into place over what we would term as being victimless crimes. It's really kind of a staggering figure when you look at just how large an impact it's had on our prison systems, and as an effect thereafter, society.
Don't we imprison the largest number of people per capita?
Yes.
Do you remember what that figure was off the top of your head?
I do, actually. It was something around, and if I am wrong, please notify us and I will put a disclaimer later. But I believe it was around 724 per 100,000 people. So that was the highest in the world. Just to put that into perspective, Russia had only 581 per 100,000.
I'm a product of the Cold War years, being that I'm older than you, and in my mind, I think Russia being a less free place. And I was very amazed when you brought those figures to me, and in my mind, I still think back to the old days of the gulags and the prison farms and all the terrible stuff that was going on in the Soviet Union. And now, since the collapse of it, I imagine that the amount of political prisoners has dropped. But we are the quote unquote freest country on the planet, supposedly.
Mm-hmm. With the highest number of non-free individuals. Yeah.
Yeah,
per capita.
It does not make any sense whatsoever. And there's a caveat. We were talking about victimless crime, and there's something I didn't get a chance to go over, and this is going to sound weird, but I want you to hear the whole thing. There is no such thing as a victimless crime.
Okay, you're going to have to elaborate on that for me.
The reason I'm making this assertion is this, that if it is a crime, that means there's a law against it. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
If there's a law, there's a punishment.
I'll say yes for now.
Almost every law entails some form of punishment against someone that breaks the law, typically. Mm-hmm. So if we call it a victimless crime, meaning that a crime has been committed, which means a law has been broken, there is still a victim in this scenario. Now, there are going to be people with the drugs, so, oh, yeah, society, it's absolutely society, or it's, you name it. No. The person getting arrested, the person that is experiencing the punishment has now become the victim. So out of an interaction between consenting people that caused no harm whatsoever, the person that actually participated in this action voluntarily now has become a victim of state-sponsored violence, whether it be a fine, whether it be a night in jail, whether it be parole, whether it be whatever else. So there cannot be a victimless crime because you become the victim.
Well, and I'm going to elaborate on this a little bit later, but I think born out of that situation is, a lot of times many of these laws are felonies.
Yes.
You're screwed after that point. You do not go back to the life that you had before in any way. And again, exceptions to every rule, but the vast majority of time, the people who now have these on our records are no longer going to be continuing to do what we consider to be victimless crimes. It's going to escalate from there because the need to supplement their lives is still there. To provide an income, have something coming in, but the means to do that have diminished. But again, I will go over that a little bit later.
That was just, and I'll let you finish. That's one of those things that kind of came to me while I was thinking about this subject before, because I've talked with a few people about victimless crimes before, but the realization that in this case that the state actually becomes the criminal, and that the criminals are the one that's putting the innocent behind bars, and you now become a victim. It's one of those that you have to scratch your head just a little bit, because the criminal is out doing their job.
Right, but I mean, look at the numbers. The numbers alone are insane when you really start looking at them. We have something like 840,000 people currently on parole, 3.7 million people on probation, and another 2.3 million people currently in prison. That's almost 7 million people total.
And those are 2018 numbers, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. I mean, let me just put this into context. In the 1970s, they approximated that there were about 340,000 people incarcerated. Total. That is less than half of the current people we have on parole. Actually, it's almost a third. And that's a 500% increase in 40 years?
Yeah, of just the people in prison.
That's not including parole, probation, anything like that. Just in prison.
So you have 7 million people total in the United States that are under the control of the Department of Corrections in one way, shape, or form, whether it be the marshals, whether it be probation officers, whether it be, you name it. It's a very large percentage of people, to be sure.
I mean, I think, personal opinion here, one of the things going on with this is that at the end of the day, prison is big business. It's really what it comes down to. I mean, it's a money-making machine.
With numbers like that, I mean, you've got a customer base for life. Amazon had to work to have that kind of a customer base that was like that. They had to provide a product or service. In this case, you're forced to take part into this service that you don't want a part of. And truly, in a very large percentage of this, and I think you had the statistics on drugs, for instance, or at least nonviolent crime, that you had no choice and you are the victim in this crime and you're the one behind bars.
Yeah, it's something like nonviolent drug-related offenses or something like 15%. So for like every 1.3 million, 200,000 of those are nonviolent drug-related offenses. That's on a state level. More local levels, they estimate to be closer to 25%. And a federal level, 44% are drug-related nonviolent crimes that people are serving time for.
Now, when I looked at the statistics, you showed me some of the graphics, and this is from prisonpolicy.org. They do an excellent job of breaking down the statistics on there with really neat-looking graphics. But what's crazy for me is that the imbalance of violent criminals to drug-related criminals in the state, it's almost like a 3 or 4 to 1 ratio of violent criminals to drug related, but on the federal side, it's the complete opposite. It blows me away that the majority of people, and it was close to like 48% of the total prison population in the federal penitentiary is in for drugs. And some other statistics I pulled from the site that I didn't have time to share with you. Since 1994, they have had over 1 million arrests per year on drug-related charges, and that's just possession. That's not dealing.
Oh, yeah. No,
and
I know.
For selling, it's less than 200,000.
I don't doubt it. I really don't doubt it. It's just, God, it's one of those things I think that's like the snowball rolling downhill where, I mean, it's got so much traction now. It's nuts. You've got a situation now where you have complete overcrowding in all of these institutions. I had a family member that worked for the county jail here, and they're completely understaffed. They're completely undertrained. There is no rehabilitation that goes on here. There's not at all.
Well, no, and especially in a local jail. I think the number was like 435,000 of the 700 plus thousand people that are there have yet to be convicted or sentenced. The majority of people in local jails are there, and that's over half, are there just for the simple fact they can't afford bail to get out. So instead of having, the guards take care of the more violent people and to protect them, they're having to be completely overworked dealing with people that honestly should not be there. I mean, how do you make bail if you're behind bars?
You don't. I mean, going through, I'm just going to run through the last of our statistics here really quick, so I don't want to bore everybody with the number game completely. But according to the site that you already mentioned, if you want to hear it, just kind of rewind a little bit. The cost per day in a federal institution to house an inmate is $99.45 a day. Seriously, I cannot tell you how many jobs I had where I did not earn $100 a day. That's just crazy. But the 2016 average sentence for drug crimes carried a mandatory minimum of 94 months. Now, obviously, there are different caveats and things that go into overall sentencing, but at 94 months, that would equal $280,449 that have been spent on the care for that one inmate for 94 months. That's an average cost per prisoner, state included, of $33,000 a year. So, I mean, more care is going into taking care of these guys and women while they're in than they are able to earn once they get out. I mean, you want to rehabilitate them? Good. Give them the $100 a day to supplement themselves or do what they're going to do. Give them a shot to do something, because once they get out, they're sure as hell not going to be earning that much.
No, they're not. And if I remember correctly with the statistics, that within a 5-year period, they have almost a 72, or it's over a 72% recidivism, meaning that they go back into jail. And not only do they go back into jail, but you had some statistics. I think it was like 1.65 million kids come from families that have been broken due to a drug-related offense and one of the parents are in jail. Is that correct?
It's something around there. I mean, basically what I'm saying is that the system is set up to have repeat and generational offenders. It really is. Being incarcerated comes with a stigma attached to it that is nearly impossible to overcome. Once you have that felony on your record, once you even have some strong misdemeanors on your record, finding employment is almost impossible because everybody vets their employees now. And if you get away with it, eventually you're going to get fired because it's going to come out in some way. Somebody's going to Google you, and this is going to come up with a mug sheet list. I mean, it's going to happen. You know, you have roughly 600,000 prisoners that are released each year. But do they come out rehabilitated and able to really contribute to society, as we put it? No.
No, we don't have them there to teach a skill. They're not there to learn something. You know, if at $33,000 a year, you know, some of these guys probably wouldn't even make that at a legitimate job.
No.
Because they don't possess the skills. Now, obviously, there's people in there that do, but unfortunately, these laws seem to have a very large impact on those that we should help the most, those that are the most disadvantaged, if you want to use that word, within our society, those that have kind of been left behind due to, honestly, in large part, due to broken families. And we don't need to necessarily go down that road because that's an entire episode in and of itself. But you're absolutely right. The likelihood of getting a job is very low. And you've got a family to feed, and you've got to feed yourself. And that's if your family hasn't moved on in the 20 years or the 94 months in the case of this mandatory minimum. If they haven't moved on, remarried, done something else. So when you get out, you've got nothing. You've got less than nothing. You're worse off than the 16-year-old kid who on his birthday is applying for a job at McDonald's. Because
hugely.
They have no experience, but you've got this big black mark, and you can't even get into a job making minimum wage. So the likelihood of you being a repeat customer is very large.
It's all the way up there, yeah. You know, it goes beyond even the social side. And I'm not going to go into any more figures on that, but I'm just going to lay it out that those who have been incarcerated are many times more likely to contract HIV or other, I guess they're not STDs anymore, they're SIDs. I don't know what the PC term is now for them, but they often suffer more from mental illness, which is, of course, often made even worse during incarceration. Finding sustainable or financially sound work is hard. And I mean, and along with those health issues, like you said, you now have these people who have a severe lack of resources or support. Now you have homelessness, joblessness, lack of family connections. You know, you're setting people up to reoffend. And then, you're what is it? Making the criminals and then punishing them for doing what you've set them up to do.
Yeah, it's exactly. You create the criminals. When the state has the ability to make the laws that turn the innocent and the virtuous, or at least you don't even have to be virtuous. I don't want anyone thinking I have this idea in my head that people are walking around with halos on their head. But if a person, in my opinion, is walking around not intent to do harm to any other person, they're virtuous. Those are the kind of people I want to be around. But if you have the ability to make laws that are guaranteed to trip these people up and make them your lifelong customer, I mean, Amazon, I keep bringing up Amazon, but they're a great example of it because they do a great job with customer service. They have to work their tails off in order to have a lifelong customer. And even then, all it's going to take is one or two bad instances of dealing with them, and you're going to go, pound sand, I'll find something else, or the nearest competitor. The state has the monopoly. They have the ability to take something that is truly victimless, that involves people that are trading goods for services and choosing to do something with their bodies that they have every right to do, and saying, I do not consent for you to consent. Therefore, you are now a criminal. I'm going to throw you in a cage because I know that you are going to be my lifelong customer. And the rest of us that support this, even if you just looked at it from a financial aspect, look at the numbers that Evelyn was talking about and the amount it costs to house one of these criminals. Is it worth it? No, of course it's not. If I can't get you with the moral argument, at least look at it from the pragmatic side. You are putting people that could be holding down a job, being oh God, I'm going to hate myself for saying this, but being a tax-paying member of society. Yes, I do hate myself. I'll do penance at the altar of Rothbard tonight, but that was a joke.
Oh, I'm laughing on the inside. Don't worry.
I really don't like you. At least if I was making this argument to those that are geared more towards punishment, I would say, look at this from a pragmatic aspect. This is costing you more money than you're getting in. You're not keeping it off the streets. You can't even keep it out of the fucking jails anyway. The war has been lost. You are destroying other countries. You are destroying our country. You're destroying your fellow Americans' lives. And you are putting your thin blue line in the line of fire. If none of that gets it, man, I don't know how to reach you. I really don't. For me, it was the moral argument. But, for you, I don't know what was more important.
I mean, the moral argument. Wow. The moral argument is obviously...
Wait, no, let me make fun of you.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I'm done.
So you take the power away when you take ownership of it yourself. Just throwing that out there. But I mean, it's more looking at, what are the effects of going the other way? What are the effects of legalizing things as opposed to making things illegal? In the countries that have instituted these changes, you have downward trends overall in crime, downward trends in the abuse of opioids and things like that, and drug use. And you also have one of the fastest growing businesses that are supplying that money into the system and into society and keeping things moving along. It's just, now, again, does that mean that legalizing everything is going to have us all prancing around happy and being friends and there's never going to be violent offenders anymore? Of course not. But what I'm saying is we've nitpicked so much. I mean, you're looking at those statistics that we were talking about. You look at an actual graph of incarceration. When the drug war started in the 80s, that damn line went vertical. I mean, it is astounding to look at it. If we have a chance, we might post it on the website or something, but it's insane. It goes from kind of a steady, we had this about number, that 340,000, and all of a sudden, I mean, it's upright.
To be fair, Nixon started the drug war with the legalization. However, I am going to agree with you. The campaign in the front of focus from the presidential side was very heavy, starting with Reagan, especially with the just say no. So I'll agree with you there, well, but I wanted that caveat.
I'm non-bipartisan here. It's not a party thing or this president did it or this person was responsible for it. I'm saying when it became a part of the conversation where that was the focal point and now this is what we're going after, now we got the system that we do that's overcrowded, undermanaged, way funded, apparently. It's just the money doesn't go, I think, necessarily where we think it's going to, but that's a whole different conversation. And you now have a large part of our population that's set up to reoffend and set up to fail.
Yeah, and the big final there is you've got people that were not intent on necessarily doing harm that you have now forced them to do harm to survive when they get out of prison. Like you said, the likelihood of getting a job is low. They still want to survive. So they are going to have to do whatever it takes in order to survive. So you took someone that didn't hate you, wasn't intent on harming you, and you've turned them into a hardened criminal. It's a lot like our foreign policy. I mentioned that earlier, and I'll insert that wherever I can. We create our own enemies here, guys, just because we think we have some moral superior high ground.
Well, it's dumb laws. It really just, for me, comes down to just being stupid laws. A lot of these things against marijuana and against the things that do no harm to anybody but yourself are on par with the dumb ones that I see in our city. Granted, I don't even know who put them in the books, but I mean, one of them, you can go to jail for a year for making lewd comments over the telephone.
That must have been pre-911, not 911, what were those, 900 operators back in the days before the internet. You had to get your rocks off some other way.
Apparently. My favorite was before proceeding through the intersection of Douglas and Broadway, a motorist is required to get out of their vehicle and fire 3 shotgun rounds into the air. It's an actual fucking law on the books. But, is it a stupid law? You read that, you're like, what the fuck? When you actually start going down this train of thought, it's the same reaction I start having, this is not serving a purpose in any way. all it's doing is making things worse.
What it does is it gives them something else to write you up for. One more thing to add another year, another 6 months, another $500 worth of fines. Why else would they still be on the books? They've got to find, it's like Al Capone. Well, why did Al Capone go to jail? It had nothing to do with prohibition.
I think they got him on like tax evasion, didn't they?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. They leave this stuff so that they have some way to grab a hold of you. And I guess that doesn't really need much commentary.
Yeah, I think as much as we're living in an age where everyone is offended by something or someone, when you really start looking into this, not much has changed over the last century or 20, when it comes to making laws that kind of serve the grand scheme of things on the highest level of the hierarchy. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously most laws are a means of exerting control over the populace, controlling the narrative, forcing your own ideals onto the masses, or as you said, generating the funds that you deem necessary. But, out of that, I think letting go of control is difficult in general for most of us, and let alone those who kind of thrive upon the power that control brings them. I think it's going to be a difficult road to really change it. It's a big deal when it happens. Like I said, calling back to the beginning, when that civil rights thing happened, it was monumental. It was huge because it undid a lot of things, but advanced us forward as a society in a lot of ways. And, it's cool for me to see the places that are at least trying to work us in that direction.
Right. Like that website I'm helping with, a friend of mine, Voluntucky. He is trying to quite literally start a place up for like-minded individuals that want to get away from this type of mentality. Hey, if you guys want laws like this, that's fine. We don't want to partake in it anymore. And it's voluntucky.com, and it's still in the works. It's my second website that I've ever designed, and I'm trying to help him get it off the ground. But his goal is to set up a community where they do have guidelines. It's not like a free-for-all, but it is going to move outside the realms of the normal currency that we have. They're going to have their own rules and regulations, but honestly, you could probably put them on a sheet of paper as opposed to fill an entire law library with the laws. And the big thing is it's going to be completely voluntary. You have to choose to move there, and you have to choose to accept the rules, and the majority of those are designed around you can't harm another person or their property. And it sounds familiar for some
weird. I don't know where that came from.
Some really weird. There's a coincidence there. I don't know where it's at. Actually, yes, I do. But
you're confusing the hell out of me.
I always do. I'm getting a little slap happy. This one's gone a little long, but it's a stark contrast to like the Free Thought or Free State Project that's out in New Hampshire, where they're trying to work within the law in order to change the laws so they don't affect them as much. This is from the ground up within these particular boundaries here. This is how we're going to operate. But
I applaud both efforts, though. I mean, whatever means you're trying to instill the ideas of change and loosening some of the constraints that are there, I think are good moves in the right direction.
I do. And I don't want it to sound like I was speaking ill of Free State. I think they've got a hard road ahead of them. It's just not my particular take. And that's the thing. There's a lot of paths to freedom. And as long as we're all walking in the same general direction, I think we should help each other out as much as possible. That's just my take.
I think it's a good one.
All right. Well, I guess we'll go ahead and end this episode here, unless you had something else you wanted to
make fun
discuss.
of you for. No, we're good. I think I'm all done.
Okay. All petered out?
Sure. We'll phrase it that way.
All right, guys. We appreciate you spending some time with us, and we'll catch you next episode.
Always looking back over your shoulder, waiting around to make your move. Don't hold back, come on and get down to it. Live your life the way that you want to.